Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Crisis Management and Response Gallagher Partnership Panel. My name is Blake Smith, and I'm honored to be your moderator for this discussion. Today, we have gathered to explore the topic of crisis management and response. Crisis management and response is the process of preparing for, responding to, and recovering from unexpected events or emergencies that can negatively impact our organizations and mission effectiveness. We are thrilled to have a panel of industry experts with who will share their insights and experience on this topic. I'll have them introduce themselves briefly and talk about their qualifications and background. Then we will dive into the heart of the discussion. Brad, would you like to lead us into this conversation?
Absolutely. Hey, Blake, thanks for the introduction and thanks for the opportunity and privilege to be on this panel today. My name is Brad Anderson. I work for an organization called Allegion, been in the security industry for a number of years, and I'm glad to be on this call today. My background has been in technology such as video, access control, and mass notification. But today's subject matter will be something that really ties more to what's heartfelt to me, and that's actually response to active shooter hostile events. And my life has been in this industry for a while and not really understanding that I didn't know much, Blake, until the 16th of February in 2016, when I came across Inland Center in San Bernardino, where there was a shooting 78 days previous. And I went on a trek in my life to learn more and understand more about active shooter response protocols. So I've taken my own initiative to go out and become NFPA 3000 certified, ICS 100, 200, 907 incident command trained and so forth, so I can be better able to support customers and people today that want to know more beyond just about a product and a data sheet, but how to handle and manage these type of situations. So looking forward to talking today, Blake.
Hey, thank you again for having me on the call here. You know, the gunshot detection space is something that's near and dear to my heart, and really kind of dovetails into a lot of what I'm doing today. And I'm the regional sales business development manager for Gallagher Security. And, you know, just in my past lives and sort of working through what the details are of the negative effects of what happens, the after incident reports, and all the things that really kind of parlay into what the initial incident was, it really kind of manifests itself into something greater. Really happy to be here at Gallagher. Really happy to be able to be, you know, talking about this subject. And this isn't emphasize here, this is not a sales pitch. This is really, how do we do better at what we're doing day to day as a whole, as an industry? You know, the security industry, the electronic security industry really needs to have more of a hand in this. And, you know, to Brad's point, not just something that we're talking about from a sales sheet or anything like that. This is real world experience that, you know, we've seen with these things that unfold time and again. So thanks for, you know, again, letting me participate in this and be on the call.
Absolutely, no problem. Now, looking forward to the conversation today. Not sure what happened with Jake, but when he pops back on, we'll have him introduce himself. So, Brad, how can organizations effectively assess their current level of preparedness for potential security crises?
Boy, that's a loaded question. How can they better assess? Well, I guess they have to. I guess probably the word I would use, Blake, is they probably kind of need to humble themselves first and understand, know themselves, right? What they think they know and what they've done traditionally. And that's why I mentioned today the whole concept of NFPA 3000, right, which is a standard that was derived by the National Fire Protection Agency back in 2018. It was called a provisional standard, Blake. And people say, wait a minute, why is the fire people coming up with a scope or a standard for active shooter? Well, this is kind of a poke, because that's because the security industry didn't. But they're also well known for the fact that they've developed standards by which people can feel safer in a building. We walk into buildings every day, Blake, that might have your reader on the door, but the safety of that door was derived by a standard. It was a lot of times developed around fire safety, right? So what better standards organization than NFPA to come up with the same type of standard approach to for active shooter hostile response? It's a consensus standard like all other building safeties are for NFPA. So what they did when they built this standard was created a scope for people to follow that would allow them to prepare for, respond to, and recover from an active shooter hostile event. And again, that could, when we say respond, those could also be preparations for things, not just active shooter, but that's what that one's based on, right? It's preparation for any type of incident. And essentially what it's designed to do is help facility stakeholders gain alignment with your local authority having jurisdiction or your AHJ. So how should somebody begin? They first should begin by saying, what's a standard look like? And I keep in my bag, the NFPA 3000 standard, along with one of my wife's latest books. Whatever Angel has written, I usually have that in my bag. I'm reading that. So fortunately, she's probably not listening to this call, but I sometimes pick this up before her books. And I want to understand, as somebody in the industry, okay, what can I offer in terms of suggestion that has nothing to do with the company I work for, but could probably increase survivability if they were to follow that protocol. So it begins with, okay, I'm an organization. I want to get started. Do I go out and buy technology? Do I go out and buy stuff, more cameras, more readers, gunshot detection? Well, none of that really matters until they really begin humbly starting with a risk assessment. And I can't go down into all the detail that is prescribed in NFPA 3000 about risk assessment, but those responsible for organizing and managing and sustaining an active shooter program in an organization, Blake, should start with a risk assessment. And the risk assessment should then be aligned with the AHJ or the authority having jurisdiction, because those cats are going to be the ones that are going to respond to incidents. Does that you follow what I'm saying, Blake? It's not.
Absolutely.
So let's do the risk assessment, but make sure you do it in alignment with fire and safety and police and so forth that are going to respond. So first is to begin with NFPA 3000, the standard that has been created, and there's a whole lot of legal reasons why to do that as well. But learning how to adopt that the same way you'd adopted NFPA 72 or NFPA 101 for life safety code, right? What's interesting about this is not a product standard. It's very interesting, right, Jay? You know what I'm saying, Blake? You look at smoke alarms or sprinkler systems. Those are or exit devices, a little plug for Legion there, but exit devices, those are all standards that are established for building code that are required, and they're product oriented. This is a standard by which you prepare for, respond to, and recover from an incident. It's not based on, and again, what's interesting about our world today is that, we've got a lot of great stuff out there in our buildings. If we go back to Columbine, April, I think 20th, 1999, which, if my math is correct, is about 25 years ago.
Yeah. And
for you kids on the call today, they were using something called VHS tape to record video, right? But they were, right? But here we are in 2024, and we had a shooting and a killing in a school in 25 or 24 right here in Atlanta, Georgia, where I happen to be today. Technology's improved in 25 years, has it not, guys? People on the call?
Absolutely.
What hasn't changed, though? It's the response to and preparing for those kind of incidents.
Yeah, I think it's really important to point out that there's documentation that exists. There's standards out there that kind of give you a outline or a blueprint of, what that should look like. But each individual institution or organization should take those and modify those as they see fit.
Right. Well, the third thing they ought to do is then develop what's called an emergency action plan. I love being able to go into organizations and saying, can I come in and be in a tabletop for you? Can I be in some incident action planning sessions? And I've done that in a couple of schools in the past when I was closer to home. And it's interesting who will be in that meeting. When you talk about the authority having jurisdiction, well, it would be the sheriff's department or the local hospital, or the school resource officers, people to that effect. And people start planning around who should be in that planning session, right? And that's exciting to me that if people start realizing you're not actually working within your own confines, you've got to also adapt people with outside the organization involved in your action planning. So, it's as part of an emergency action plan. The fourth thing is giving external access to your partners. Well, who are our partners? Sheriff's Department, Police Department, Fire Department. And this could be somewhat controversial when I say this, Blake, but I don't care. But if we're responding to a call, anybody responding would love to have greater situational awareness. They'd like to know what they're coming up on, right? Does that make sense, Blake?
No, absolutely.
And
yep,
so
agree.
Having external access to your surveillance, to your access, to your communication systems for an incident response, right? I've got an emergency action plan. I've got a recipe. I've got it documented. An organization, employee actions during any kind of emergency. Well, then I should then have my external partners have access to resources that can increase or improve their situational awareness when they respond. Okay. What that means is, can I lock or unlock a door? Can I use mass notification? Can I see video inside of there? Steve, great point about organizations reading after action incident reports. I mentioned San Bernardino, and a year and a half after San Bernardino, and I'm getting, my hair curls up on my skin when I talk about this. I'm reading the after action incident report, and it was amazing. There was all this great technology, but nobody used the technology that was available during the incident. The incident started when a 223 round went through the drywall, hit a water pipe for the fire alarm system. Of course, you get a sounder back at the command center. We got running water. And I asked them a year and a half later, what's the first thing you do? Well, we roll trucks. They just simply roll trucks. And I said to them, did you ever consider, number one, looking at the video? And then you go on and continue to understand a little bit more about what took place. They couldn't open the doors. They were begging on the audio tapes, where's an access control card? They couldn't get doors open fast enough to clear the building to bring in EMS. And then thirdly, we had a second building that people were locked up inside this building and nobody knew how to operate the PA system. So the idea of external access to systems, and fifth thing I would say is learn how to train. Training should be based on the risk assessment, right? And training should be conducted jointly with all anticipated responding entities. And those entities should train with all the electronic countermeasures that are available to them during an incident. Does that make sense, Blake?
Yeah, I think you hit on something kind of very important there also, which is staying agile and adaptable in your approach, right? When considering the threat that may be there, right? And it's not always going to be an active shooter, but it could be other types of threats. It could be, a hurricane or a tornado or something
Absolutely.
like that, right? So there's lots of different things.
A derailment. How about if you had a university with a train track outside there, and you sat down and did a tabletop and said, what trains go down this track? What kind of stuff is on this train? Do they carry chemicals or chicken manure? What's on there?
Right. Steve, I was going to ask if you have anything to add to that.
I think where this all kind of stems from, and, in conversations that we've had in other instances, Brad, we start looking at how'd we get here, right? And we dig back in and we look in Chicago, Our Lady of Our Lord's, fire. And all of a sudden, now we're here. So there's a time span that's in between those two moments. The moment was, here's all these people trapped inside the building and couldn't get out because the doors were chained because they didn't want people getting in. At the same time, the first responders couldn't get in and the people inside couldn't get out. And I forget what the casualty number was there, but that initiated, mass notification of an alarm. So here's what happens The fire alarm, there's a fire, everybody needs to get out, so let's enunciate that. Hey, that's great. Now, where is it? Because we don't want to run into the fire. So when you start looking at some of the modernization of these systems, I think it's important to understand too where not to go. We all kind of agree it's important to get out, but where shouldn't we go? And that agility that Blake was talking about there for a second, that really kind of dials everything back into the preparedness of what do we do if, and all those other circumstances. And I think it's hard for us to really kind of sit back and go, all right, we're gonna document every situation, every scenario that's going to come up. That's not going to happen. There's not enough paper and there's not enough books or time, to figure out every scenario. But the generalization of what each of those are and what ifs, to your point, the 223 going through the pipe, that created a avalanche of circumstances from which they couldn't properly recover because they didn't understand the first part of that. And you said it, you like drove the point home. You got to practice these situations, that situational awareness, and how to respond to it in a way that's effective. As soon as you take away the effectiveness of what it is that you're doing, then the wheels begin to fly off the bus. And then I think we'd all agree here, that's when the attorneys start lining up outside, because in every one of these after incident reports, they're ready, to help out, and take care of the things that they need to take care of. Point that I want to make about that is, if all these things were done in a way that was more concise and the old adage, you practice like you play, or you play like you practice. Yep. I think is the key component to that. So figuring out what to do and when to do it is important. Technology, I think, is the bus driver today, right? So we can take that technology and really kind of amplify any situation into what do we know. If you're a pilot, what's the big thing? Is fly the plane. When there's an air incident, fly the plane, right? You got to fly the plane. So do that first. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Blake.
And we'll get into the technology piece in a minute, but go ahead, Brad.
Let me jump on what Steve just mentioned. You talk about lawyers, and there's a legal term that can be applied to this. It's called foreseeability, right? It's actually a term that is used in court, is used by lawyers, and it means it's a legal duty, right? There's a legal responsibility of the stakeholders at a school, for example, the Board of Education, the superintendent, the principals, to an obligation arising from a contract of the parties or operation of law, meaning you're responsible for those that are under your care, right?
Duty of care.
Is it foreseeable that there could possibly be a shooting in a school in the United States? Obviously, it's foreseeable. Well, for those that turn their head or ignore and don't update technology, don't train, don't develop standards, don't use the past standard, it's going to be a world of hurt. If you go back to Parkland School District and understand, as you said, when the lawyers showed up and the lawsuits that occurred now, it's in the billions now in terms of lawsuits. So people aren't necessarily being forced into doing things today, Steve, but they might be wise to do them.
Be in their best interest, for sure.
Right.
I'll just jump in too, hoping everyone's got my audio now. And
we got you, Jake.
I'll just add, we're also at a fascinating time in the industry where, a decade ago, everything was a proprietary system. And today it's all about connectivity and communication. And we're talking about the process of communication outside of the technology side. But, 15 years ago, nobody was talking about connecting their access control system and their video system, or their mass notification and their visitor management system. And I think that's definitely been the shift. I mean, whether they're honest about it or not, everyone in the industry is talking about having an open platform. And a lot of that goes back to, we need to have all of our security platforms and facility platforms that are critical in these types of events, as you're articulating, Brad and Steve, to be working together and talking together.
Yeah. Jake, let's real quick, take a moment just to introduce yourself. Your background.
Jake Cimarata, struggle with audio day to day, unfortunately. So I'm the VMS seller over here at 3SI. And for those of you who aren't familiar with 3SI, we're the company that sort of pioneered die packs and GPS tracking for cash in the banking industry. So go to your favorite bank robber movies and the die packs explode in the getaway car. That's our technology, and we've evolved and taken that into GPS technology, and now developing it into a further total pane of glass in a VMS platform with our Surveil VMS, which is a recent add-on to our product portfolio. So here at 3SI, we're working on securing all kinds of different facilities for customers and taking a very modern approach to how VMS is done, and working sort of as an open vendor, just like we're talking about, to make sure that we're able to communicate with the other systems that are in play. And one of the great things that we have in our partnership with Gallagher is the ability for our customers to maintain that Gallagher familiarity and use case, and deliver all of our functionality that customers in our platform are familiar with, being able to send that over with an API first approach into Gallagher. So thanks for, sorry the introduction's a little late, but thanks for having me on here. And again, historically in my career as a VMS seller in the enterprise space, both with private sector as well as Fed customers, I've had the privilege of supporting quite a few large Gallagher deployments, as well as in my current role here at 3SI, actively still supporting. So
I was just thinking die packs, how to have fun at Office Mates. That's where my mind went.
For sure.
Okay. Well, I want to kind of summarize where we were at before. And I think what we've identified is there's publications that are out there that provide an outline, right? There's risk assessments that need to be completed, right? The NFPA 3000. And no matter how good these plans are on their initial approach, without proper, reevaluating, addressing, and looking at other case studies or lessons learned from other incidences, and then executing some type of practice, putting that into play, whether it's locking down facilities or getting to muster locations or the like. Again, hitting on those key points, I think. So, Jake, let me ask you, how can organizations ensure a balance between maintaining a secure environment and avoiding excessive restrictions on everyday operations?
Yeah, great question. I'll first start by answering it by saying I think the first thing to think about is really kind of what we're talking about a minute ago, is keeping an open line of communications across different departments, information security, IT admins, corporate security resources. They should be all on the same page before we even have that conversation. So everyone understands the network design and network topology, understands the aspects of the system. Is it air gapped? Is it a multi-domain environment? And when those sides of the organization are all on the same page, security understands that they're not excessive protocols, right? They're needed and they're required. And what we've all seen as physical security professionals is that the cyber hardening and the trends of updating firmware for edge devices or password rotations on edge devices, those aren't going to be decreasing. They do feel excessive to some groups, but I really think the goal is not to avoid the restrictions, but to figure out what kind of automation and processes we can put into place so that the question and the conversation isn't about what's excessive and restrictive that's a burden on my department, and more of what can we do to maintain the right cybersecurity and the right balance. We as a software application have gone towards containers to help accomplish that, and using the Docker application and the microservices to basically help run updates and manage different things in the system that would have been a manual task, would have been a process for security admins or system admins. Also, the ability to automate things that were manual process, right? So there weren't the same requirements for password rotations for some organizations that I've had a privilege of working with from a few years back to today. And so now there's a team of guys who spend half their year doing certain things that really, if there was a way to automate it in the system, that would generate and save a whole ton of time. So I really think it comes down to automating the best practices for cyber monitoring and proactive device management, without having to impact the process and the firewalls and the restrictive nature that corporate network security has put in place for frankly likely needed and good reason.
Yeah, how can we balance operational effectiveness, I guess, and keeping just normal everyday business happening unrestricted, I guess is.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I think a lot of organizations are having to deal with is that dialogue of this is how we used to do things, and this is how we need to think about doing things differently moving forward. And again, I think it starts, Blake, with bringing in the IT resources and the InfoSec teams early on, so that corporate security can understand why certain firewalls are put in place, and they collectively, as an organization, can resolve and go about whatever they're trying to deploy in the best approach and best design.
Yep. Steve, Brad, you guys have any comment on?
No, I think it's about the cohesiveness of all those things kind of working together, right? Where it fails. I think it's important to understand the success as well as where it doesn't. Where it fails is if you get misinformation, that comes out of one of those pieces of technology. Hey, it says it's going to do this, but it really only comes up to this standard. Adamant on, testing. So therefore the drills and the testing and how you put all those pieces together really become of probably the most critical piece to execute once you've established what that risk assessment is. You can have the best assessment done, but if you don't employ what it is that your experts have put together for you, then it's all kind of a wash, and that's where things don't end up on the right end of things. So just my thoughts on it.
Well, let me add a little bit and the whole idea of an incident emergency action plan that should be established and developed after your risk assessment. I think I said this when we talked earlier, Blake, was, I live down in Florida, and there's something called an all hazard event. That's a term that comes from FEMA. When you talk about incident command structure, it's actually basically a FEMA structure that's actually used by all law enforcement and fire all across America. And an all hazard event is like, hey, when something's going to go down, are you prepared for it? Well, in Florida, we don't prepare for avalanches, right?
Right.
And in Salt Lake City, they don't plan for hurricanes, right? And if there is an event, then have you got the stuff you need for what could possibly happen, right? Mm-hmm. And part of the whole idea is like, okay, so this is something that could possibly happen. I used a train illustration a minute ago, and Jake, you're a video guy. If we know the trains go by on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and it's right outside the university, and there's a tunnel that goes under the tracks because they go to the fields. Hey, what if there was a derailment? What's on the truck or on the train? Is it a chemical? What might I want to know? Well, that's the kind of stuff you do in planning for your environment, right? Because that's really, is it foreseeable? You want to have some reasonable care if something like that happen. Well, what if our PTZ cameras turn to that intersection on a simple command that I could do at the command center, right? What if my mass notification could tell my people, hey, by the way, don't go out this door, go out this door. Or what if we looked at our technology and said, if this happened, if I was walking across campus, what could my technology do for me in that particular scenario, right? And Steve, you're right. We need to practice that. Has it ever happened? No, we had a derailment 10 years ago. Oh, so you're saying a derailment might happen here again. It has happened before. Is it foreseeable? So we start looking at what's called best practice as another legal term. What's the best practice that we can employ with our technologies, with our preparation, with our planning, with our AHJ? Because we go back to the thing you said a minute ago, Steve. Well, what about when the lawyers show up, right? And you don't want to make an incident about a lawyer or paying out. But if you start talking that way, people might up their game about being prepared, and not ignoring glaring incidents where we don't practice, we don't think about what might happen. We have it's a breach of duty if we don't provide reasonable care. All those terms, by the way, are legal terms. So that's my comment on that. I can keep going with it.
It's interesting you say that, because one of the things that I keep coming back to, I got to tour the 911 center in Washington, D.C. And I thought, okay, it's a 911 center. Who cares? This is the heartbeat of the city. Unbeknownst to me, if an individual's on the sidewalk, so we're talking about response, right? What do I do if there's an incident that happens, and where do we send those people? And who do we send, and why are we sending those people? So there's a checklist that has to happen that takes place there. And there are 27 different agencies that can respond to an incident inside of DC. Right. And I was like, so hold on a minute. If it happens on the sidewalk on the corner of Constitution and Fifth, then we send this group. If it's on the street, we send this group. And if it's in the crosswalk, we send this group. And so the specificity that's required when you start talking about your incident response, again, this kind of parlays back into what do we do if? And so that response planning, you've got the incident. Now, what do you do with it? What technology can you employ to help with that? And I was totally blown away at the detail that comes with something like that. So being able to see, hey, if it's this specific geography within 4 feet of where that person is, they know the call and where it's coming in from. So now when we begin to employ all the different technologies, all the different, hey, we've got this incident that's happened, the planning, then how do we assess what happened? And all the experts show up and all the things happen. You know what? That guy is on the curb and the sidewalk in the crosswalk. Now what do we do? Whose jurisdiction is that? So
right.
Just a bunch of things begin to happen after the fact. But I liken this back to one of the things that you just said. And Jake, when you start talking about what happens to the cameras and what information do they take and what do they record and who's that available to, that all has to be factored into your incident response. How am I going to respond to that? Because somebody is going to call up and say, I need that footage. Well, hold on. We can't deliver that footage just yet. Sunshine laws take effect and you have to be able to disperse certain information, but there's other information that's pertinent to an investigation that you can't give that out yet. The people that are there that have the admin rights to that information have to know what they can hand out and what they can't. This is all part of that planning. So, there really is a lot of detail that gets poured into that, and that people, really have to understand the depth of before they can, move around with that. You have to know what you're doing with it, for sure.
Yeah. So it's really about identifying key stakeholders and being proactive and understanding what those stakeholders actually need and communicating that.
Yeah. And it's like you say, it's a bunch of different departments within working together, facilities and security. If they're working in two separate systems and they're not in communication with each other, they're supposed to be helping throughout an incident and probably both need the same exact set of data, and they each only have half of what they need to do their job effectively.
Well, Jake, you bring up an interesting observation. If you guys remember the I forget the name of it, it was a nightclub down in Orlando, 2016. One of the interesting things about a standard being developed, I had to keep going back to this daggone NFPA 3000, but Chief Otto Draz, who was the chief of the Orange County Fire Department, responded to that incident. We talk about communication challenges that occurred that day. And when you set up what's called incident command, first guy on site sets up command, he's in charge there. Well, that day, police went and fire went, and they both set up incident commands. And then one person from fire came over to the police, and a guy from police came over to fire, so they could be on the same channels. And what was crazy about that event was the fire department looked at the sides of the building as being side 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the police looked at it being A, B, C, and D. So within our own response mechanism, forget the technology, right? We didn't communicate very well within incident responses, right? So Steve, when you look about all those people that could possibly respond, part of this whole thing is sitting people down, taking a standard like NFPA 3000 and saying, okay, folks, let's forget about technology. Let's just talk about how we just communicate and how we actually respond to something. We saw in Pennsylvania with the shooting, the assassination attempt. There was a breakdown in communications. Okay,
Totally.
and here we are, guys, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years after some of these other incidents, and we still haven't fixed the most common basic functions that need to occur when the fit hits the shan. My grandmother would say.
Interoperability, Brad.
Right.
If you're not able to communicate with one agency to the other, i.e.,
Exactly.
your fire, EMS, and police, and Maryland, for example, it wasn't very long ago that the sheriff's departments, the local law enforcement, county, and state were not able to communicate with each other. They would show up to an incident and they'd go, "Which walkie-talkie do I use?" So again, that planning has to go into it too.
Yeah, that's a really good segue, Steve. So, in what ways can technology be leveraged to enhance crisis management and response in physical security scenarios?
So I think there's a couple of different tiers that you work yourself through, right? And it does go back to being able to set up in the same room, the tabletop of how do we approach what's there. And if you look at it from the perimeter inwards, or I know where my central core is, where all of the key elements, the decision makers, and probably some of my head end information are kept. What do I do and how do I propagate that information out? And then the other side is, how do I take and allow access when it's necessary? So for example, you fire departments are used to seeing the Knox box hanging on the wall to get into any door.
Right.
Get you in the door, turn a key. There's technology that's available that says, here's a card that's in there instead of a key that gets you into the door, which is important now because we want to secure that to a higher level. There's this card. And guess what? That card only works whenever the fire alarm has been pressed, or that card only works whenever the building's been put into official lockdown mode, whatever the case may be. But then it's how do you incorporate taking the access and the intrusion and making it so that those two things are talking to each other, the basic elements, right? And then whatever those two pieces of technology are doing, what role does the video play in the success of those two things to be able to validate and verify who it is that's coming and going through the main points of entry and other places, like the door that got left open by the janitor with the mop bucket. And now we've seen it, right? We've all seen it. Now we've seen the situation where all of those things come back to themselves with getting the right people in the right place at the right time. We could sit here and name incidents, major incidents all day long. The fact is, and don't think that you're immune to this stuff, 243 gunshot incidents in schools where a weapon was discharged year to date. I think that's the number. And most recently, with the incident that occurred in Florida, how much of this stuff could be prevented? Is gunshot detection the answer? Is profiling the answer? Is locking the doors the answer? It's taking the pieces of technology that we have today, making them talk together, and in that unified physical plant, making sure that everybody knows how to use them. If we don't have the ability to use them properly, then that too falls back on training. But that too becomes a shortcoming of any success of anything that's happening with these incidents. How do you overcome what those pieces are? Well, you have to train. And being able to train, it's got to be simple to use. And if it's simple to use, then everybody's going to want to use it. And I think that's the key. If I look at any of this stuff, we all want it to be successful, right? That's the buzzword that I'm going after here. We want it to be successful. If we go from everybody's heart's in the right place and we're not just trying to drive information about how do we get the most dollars out of this thing as sales guys or whatever, it's not about any of that. It's about lives. At the end of the day, we strip all this stuff away. Did we save a life today? Did we work harder to try and make it so that somebody can get home to their families tonight? I love my job to pieces, but at the end of the day, I've got to make sure that I'm home to support my family. That's your loved ones, your people that are around you. And if you're not doing those basic things, if you haven't, attempted to automate your response to these things, and make sure that those automations, there's a gas leak on the 8th floor. Don't go to the 8th floor if you're not on it. But you're on the 8th floor, get out, right? And if you're in a different building, don't go to that building. That key information needs to be dispersed. And there's so many different ways of getting that done. What's the most efficient and effective way of making all of those things work together? I think working together, we're the sum total of all of our collective knowledge versus trying to work this thing separately. So I'll segue back to you, Brad. That really kind of dovetails the start of the conversation with the NFPA call, right?
Right.
And
let me add to what you said there. What you're talking about is an annex. And for those on the call or listening not familiar with an annex, and by the way, you go back 10 years, I couldn't spell annex, even though it was 4 letters, right? I didn't understand what an annex was. And my friend and mentor, Jerry Wilkins, spent a lot of time. I went through his training as well as Alice and NFPA and FEMA, ICS, and so forth. Essentially, you have an emergency action plan, right? And if you go to a SOC, a security operations center, they probably don't have books anymore. It's all on web. But if there's an incident, they would grab a book and drop it down, and they would have what's called an annex. There's my recipe for a response if this incident occurred, okay? The narrative I've been leading with is saying, okay, you've got your response plan. In that annex, are you putting very specific actions with electronics in that annex, right? And training with that. I mean, I'm saying, Steve? Because basically it's this. If it's not in that playbook, they're not going to use it. And if it's not in the playbook, they're not going to practice with it. And here we are, after Columbine back in 1999, we're still trying to help people with great technology, but if they don't put it in that annex, it's not really going to come out. And what happens is that there's something called proximate cause, and I'll read it to you guys. It's if you don't follow best practices, there's something called proximate cause, the result of a direct action and cause of loss to property that sets in motion a chain of events that is unbroken and causes damage, injury, and destruction with other interference. In other words, if you fail to do something, if you fail to plan, fail to practice, fail to get in your annex, somebody, and there's some somebodies coming in this world, right, is going to end up paying for that, right? Because we have gotten tired of all this since Columbine. And the lawyers have kind of are now at a point, we can't even insure you insurance company because you're not prepared if this was to occur. So it's tough to have to go to that length. You follow what I'm saying, Steve? Blake?
But yeah, what's your SOP, right? What's your standard operating procedure for getting things done?
But we have to take this seriously. I mean, it's just, and I'm not saying people aren't taking it serious. I'm not saying that. But all the way back to 1970, General Duty Clause was the Occupational Safety Health Act says employers are required to provide their employees with a place of employment that is free of recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious harm. Today, the General Duty Clause could be applied to an active shooter hostile event. Were you prepared? Was it likely to occur? I'm not this is not a fear-mongering kind of thing, guys. I mean, it's like, come on.
Yeah, well, and I'll jump in too before Brad starts reading from the book again there. But from a video perspective, and I've seen this as a VMS seller with the privilege of working with some of the largest Fortune 100 companies and some large government agencies. There are so many enterprise VMS systems that are basically designed, configured, and used as reactionary, right? Somebody scratched my car in the parking lot, or this woman said she lost her purse in the store, or whatever the case is. There's just so many customers that don't have their head wrapped around designing a video system to be proactive instead of reactive. And one of the things we always talk about here at 3SI as a new player in the VMS space is how so many enterprise video systems are not truly connected to the partners in the community that they need to be connected to, i.e. local law enforcement. So one of the things we're lucky to have as an organization with our historical GPS tracking system is 10,000 direct connections into local dispatch and law enforcement. And I think a lot of large video deployments in the public and private sector need to think about improving those relationships with law enforcement, but also improving that configuration of a system to be not just reactive, but proactive in the way we're monitoring. And it goes to even simple things like we're talking about crisis management events. Even if there's a leak detector that goes off in a building and I can tie a $200 CCTV camera to visually verify so I don't have to send somebody to the other side of the campus, where technology is automating to save money on payroll, operational overhead, all kinds of different things. And that's in a non-crisis environment. So you put that into multiplying feet on the street for a crisis like the ones you're talking about, Brad. It's exponential.
Right. Hey, and Steve, to defend myself, so I'm an old school guy. I got a notebook. I mean, you kids are probably doing this right now, making notes. I keep in the front of my book a set of notes just to remind myself. Yes, well, you're old too, Steve. Just to remind myself, what's my vision, the risk formula, the liability formula. I may be in and again, I'm not talking about Allegiant here today, but I'm in this business side of my life. But this front of my book is all about me being aware of how we can save lives or increase survivability.
I'm going to dovetail what you just said right there and say automate, delegate, or eliminate, right? If there's a way to automate a process, why haven't we done that? If there's a way to delegate a process, how do we incorporate what that is? And when you take things that are in the book, when you take things that the video system produces, and from that, you're able to go, I can lock this door or allow access with that door based on circumstance. And the Boolean logic is from here to the, around the block in length of things that we can tell that to do, if then that, or nor. Now we've taken that to a whole new level. And I think that's, when we employ the technology side of it, that's more what we need to start helping the end user focus on being able to do. It's a mindset. All I need to do is get in the door. Well, take a key, you can get in the door. But if you want to get in the door and you want to have accountability for who came in the door or who you don't let in the door, I think is more important. And you have a way to video verify that. And you have a way of using your locking mechanism to work with you. And you guys got some pretty cool stuff, by the way. I just, little plug, Brad, just to throw that out there. All of those things kind of come back together in a way that's positive, that helps the site be more secure. Guess what happens? There's data out there that says when an employee feels more secure, they are more productive. Translate that into dollars and cents.
Well, here's a good one. And Jake, you're in the video space, right? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, and I'm not doing a commercial. Do you have any is like Stenophone or Commend or anybody integrated with your video side of the world?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a great example actually, because there's Gallagher customers today that we're working with who have legacy existing Gallagher end users that have legacy intercom systems that they can't tie together. And so our platform is being looked at as sort of being this single pane of glass where we can ingest all the Gallagher events, ingest all of the intercom events. But yeah, SIP server integration and those kind of things, that comes up very frequently.
So you've heard the expression, see something, say something.
Mm-hmm.
Any video camera that's out there that you can't say something while you're looking at something. Now think about it for a second. Get back to my wife. I could be in the back. She was visiting her family. I'm in the backyard with the dog. She comes to the Ring camera, sees us, and she starts saying something. Dog goes wild, right? And yet we in the security space have a lot of video, but we don't necessarily have audio associated with it. If you can provide an instruction through an IP speaker or an emergency stanchion where there's a speaker and whatever the technology might be, right? Analog, digital, SIP, whatever. But just get the mindset. Wait a minute, I got this thing on this dock down there and I can see the boats pull up or somebody fell overboard, but I can't warn anybody. I can't provide instruction. Look for the guy in the red jacket. And that's just like the simplest thing in the world. You may have the audio and the video, but you don't associate them. So interesting things we can do as an industry of just kind of opening our minds up and saying, you know what, let's look at some of this a little bit different with the existing technology, how we can make it more better. That's kind of a bad way to say it, but that's a term.
Yeah, and your scenario with the audio and the video not only streamlines the operational side internally, but it's a huge deterrent for the operation. I mean, I have a lot of organizations that run 24 SOCs, and they want talk down functionality to be able to scream at the vagrants that are vandalizing their asset or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Well, guys, we're coming up here really quickly on our hour, so thank you for the participation. So the way I see it is based on the panel responses to successfully mitigate and manage a crisis as it unfolds, evolves, and recovers requires planning, communication, and training. However, without proactively coordinating efforts across various functions such as physical security, IT, HR, communications, and other key stakeholders, an organization may struggle to efficiently handle crisis management situations successfully. Effective crisis management not only addresses the immediate situation, but also safeguards the organization's long-term interest and reputation. Having a comprehensive crisis management program in place is crucial, including a post-crisis review to evaluate successes and areas for improvement. Continual plan adjustments, education, and lessons learned should be documented and used to update the organization's crisis management plan, enhancing future response efforts. Thank you all for your active participation and thoughtful responses. Your engagement has made this panel discussion truly dynamic and valuable. As we conclude, I encourage you to continue these important conversations within your organizations and professional networks. To continue the discussion with us, please scan the QR code for each of our respected companies and follow up with us at GSX. On behalf of Gallagher and our esteemed panelists, thank you for joining us for Crisis Management and Response. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and have a wonderful rest of your day.